all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, which I'm excited to say we're now airing 5 days a week. Once a week, you can still hear an interview with a different consciousness change maker that is out there working tirelessly to help catalyze change and expand awareness on Spaceship Earth. But now, in addition to the weekly interview, on the other 4 weekdays, you can tune in to myself and my co-host Dalian taking questions from the audience, covering a bit of positive news, giving interpretations of a favorite quote to ponder, and you can hear us ranting about whatever other positive ponderings come to mind on that day. And as you guys might imagine, producing this podcast is definitely a labor of love for me and Dalian. But make no mistake, it takes a lot of hard work to put it together for you guys, especially now that we're doing it 5 days a week. So if you enjoy the fruits of our labor, please go over, give us a good rating and a review on iTunes. Subscribe for free while you're at it, of course, if you haven't done that already. iTunes truly is the holy grail when it comes to podcasting, and good ratings and reviews are what help our iTunes ranking so that we can gain more exposure in the massive sea of other podcasts that are out there. Even if you have terrible ADD and don't want to take the time to write out a review, trust me, I get it. I'm a bit of a spaz too, but please take at least, the 9.2 seconds it takes to give the show an honest star rating, which only takes one little click. I assure you it will be very much appreciated by us, and that the good karma gods will rain blessings down upon thee for doing so. Also, this week's episode is sponsored by Procabulary.org. Procabulary offers a brilliant new online language course that I just recently completed myself called Core Language Upgrade. The course material itself is designed to help you analyze and then reprogram the way you use your words and language to create your reality. I personally believe the words you choose to speak or write out is referred to as spelling for a very good reason. You're literally casting an energetic spell every time you open your mouth, which means it's of the utmost importance that you have a foundational understanding about the power or lack of power that the words you're choosing to use conjures up. I strongly believe language mastery is a highly important skill set that way too few people have taken it upon themselves to become educated on. And for those of you that are regular listeners of this podcast, I'm constantly talking about how we all create our reality with our thoughts and words. And what Procabulary does is actually provide you with an incredibly easy to follow roadmap that shows you how to go about reprogramming your language so you can start getting better results in every aspect of your life. And the great thing about the Core Language Upgrade course is that it only takes about 10 minutes a day spanned over 21 days to complete. I personally found the minimum daily time requirement made it really easy to digest and assimilate the empowering information I was receiving each day. Now, as a Positive Head podcast listener, if you decide to go to procabulary.org and purchase any of their online courses, you automatically get $50 if you use the promo code POSITIVEHEAD, all one word, on the checkout page. I personally recommend everyone starts with a beginner course. It's called Core Language Upgrade, and the retail price for that course is $299. I'd say it's worth every penny, but with the Positive Head promo code, it only costs you $249 after your discount. Also, if you need more convincing about the power of Procabulary, check out the Positive Head podcast, where I actually interview Procabulary co-founder Mark England, and we discuss language mastery in great detail. All right, all you positive heads, on this episode, I'm very pleased to have AC Johnner here with me on the show. AC is the writer, director, and producer behind the documentary film that explores the spirituality of electronic music culture called Electronic Awakening. In addition, AC is also a writer, a researcher on subjects such as transformational festivals, spirituality, technology, and transhumanism. He actually has a forthcoming book entitled Electronic Revival we'll talk a little bit about. And AC, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Brandon. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I've been looking forward to catching up with you for quite some time, and having seen ever since seeing, the documentary Electronic Awakening, it's certainly something that piques my interest and is close to my heart, and resonates strongly with me, as someone who is a constant part of the Transformational Festival culture, and I love your whole perspective on it that you dive into. So I look forward to kind of picking your brain about what motivated you to do this.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you found the film, and I'm glad, in turn, I'm glad I found your show. It's really interesting. But yeah, to get into what led me to make the film, it all started back when I was going to school for anthropology, many years ago. And I chose to study rave culture. In anthropology, we study cultures. And so at the very end, we had to choose a culture and a topic, to study. And I had always been curious of electronic dance music ever since I'd been in high school. There was a friend of mine who his life had been completely transformed by this music. I mean, this guy, his social life went from nil to extreme extroversion like overnight. I mean, he lost weight, his skin glowed, his bedroom wall was filled with like photos of these wild all-night dance parties, insane costumes, extraordinary club environments with lasers, visual projections, falling confetti. And I was just, I wanted to experience that. And I, always bombarded him with questions about what that was and what it was he had found. And obviously I'd seen it change him so much and change his personality so much. I knew that it was something really powerful. He introduced me to a lot of the music. I never really got it. He, just burnt me CD after CD, and I listened to the stuff, and I just, it didn't really catch me. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's an experience for a lot of people hearing this music. It's not really, you can't really get it for the first time in your living room. Really
that was definitely my experience when first exposed to electronic music. Thinking back into the way back in the 90s when rave culture first appeared, I was pretty much kind of anti. I was just forming a band and like, oh, I like live music. Like this stuff sucks. And it wasn't until really 2000, 2001 till I had a girlfriend who was really into house music, and it was the first thing that I actually heard that I'm like, oh wow, this is actually soulful, and I can really I really can kind of dig this. And that was my introduction to actually learning to appreciate it. So I definitely can relate to you on that.
Yeah. And for a lot of people, it's really the experience of, hearing it for the first time on, on the mega sound systems that it's made for, at an event that really opens a lot of people up.
Yeah.
But, so I was always curious about what it was that he had found. And so I started reading about these events, and of course, being in anthropology, I was interested in studying shamanism. And when I started reading about these events, I was realizing that, what these kids were doing was, really similar to ancient shamanic traditions of, ecstatic trance ceremonies. So they were celebrating a universal human experience of achieving ecstasy through music and dance, a practice which had been recorded in cultures throughout the world as a way of connecting with the divine power. But for many of these early cultures, ecstatic dancing was the foundation of their rituals, mythology, and sacred religions. They were connecting with with the spirit realm. And,
right.
The ecstatic trance states were, elevated into these other dimensions in which they would, contact spirits. And so, I was wondering what these kids were experiencing at these raves, if they were experiencing similar things. And of course, my kind of science fiction-y, mindset like to, dream that they were opening up portals on dance floors and accessing these places. But I didn't really know the reality of all that. So I presented, I wanted to, take this angle and studying the culture and studying them from a comparison between their practice to these, ecstatic practices of, shamanic traditions. And I presented that to, my anthropology department, and their reaction wasn't the most positive. They were like, how can you take this, this traditional indigenous thing and compare it to what these kids are doing, on drugs and nightclubs? And they weren't too happy with it.
Right.
But kind of, inspired by their dismissal of me, I continued the research, and things really took a turn when I discovered an article published out of Berkeley by Scott Hudson, and this is back in 1998. The article titled "The Raves: Spiritual Healing in Modern Western Subcultures." So I was like, "Oh, this is exactly what I was looking for." And so,
right up your alley, yeah.
Yeah, and so I'll read the pretext here. It's at raves, young men and women dance to electronic music from dusk till dawn. Previous scholarship treats the rave as a hypertext of pleasure and disappearance. However, such a postmodern view does not attend to the potent and meaningful spiritual altered states of consciousness that raves and therapeutic results, spiritual healing, such states are said to bring. While physiological processes, exhaustive dancing, auditory driving may contribute to altered states of consciousness, symbolic processes create appropriate frameworks for spiritual healing. Such therapeutism can be fully understood in the context of other spiritual subcultures, placing rave within the context of these subcultures' foregrounds for questions of further research. So basically saying that that these raves were kind of a modern form of shamanic healing. And so I was like, okay, so somebody else, before me who's a PhD has gone out and, said this. So I'm
Right.
going in the right direction. And then I found, in the book Traces of Spirits by Robin Sylvan, he writes that, for teenagers and young adults, musical subculture to which they belong provides an all-encompassing orientation to the world as any traditional religion. And then in his later book, Transformation, which was actually about rave culture in general, Sylvan set out to investigate the various religious motifs among rave culture in the early millennium, arguing that rave culture was seeding a new unifying spirituality, one that was universal across, all languages, religions, and nationalities. And then, of course, I found Graham St. John's Rave Culture and Religion, which is a tome of research on this topic. And part of the book description here offers insights on a post-traditional religiosity through studies of raves, Gnostic narratives of ascensionism and reenchantment, explorations of the embodied spirituality, and millennialistic predispositions of dance culture. So finding all these, I was like, whoa, okay, so this is real. So there's more happening here than just a dance party. And, I went back to my anthropology department with all that I had found, and I say, hey guys, here's these other anthropologists who have studied this angle of the culture, and they say it's real. So
in your face.
Yeah. So not only were they, excited that I had discovered this, but they gave me a grant to actually go out and conduct field work.
Wow.
Yeah, they bought my ticket to Burning Man and all these different.
That's a fun grant.
Yeah. So I definitely was rewarded. I got they bought my ticket to Burning Man and all these different festivals out on the West Coast. And I was going to go out and spend 6 months going to all these parties and events for the first time, interviewing people and kind of, trying to find out if this kind of spiritual side of the culture was really real. And
sure.
So in 2006, I went to Shambhala, was my first event. And, I went there with a camera.
That's in Canada, right?
Yeah, that's in Canada. And yeah, it's an amazing festival. But it was my, my first party,
I've heard good things.
My first electronic music event. And,
what year was this?
This was 2006.
Okay.
And, I went there with a camera and a notepad as a researcher. So it was a different way of kind of stepping into the culture than, most people do. And, when I was there, I witnessed the participants building altars. They were planning sacred ceremonies. They were endowing a mythology incorporating narratives of electro-salvation, techno-singularities of ascensionism, and, apocalypse. Found the participants were praying on the dance floors, testing to hearing voices in the music, and some of them talking about encountering extraterrestrials.
Wow.
Many of them were talking about this, sacred force or energy that governed all life, which, seemed to me akin to mana in archaic shamanic traditions, but believing that this force could not only be modulated through like yoga and meditation, but also through ecstatic dance and electronic music.
Right.
And, they also expressed the shared worldview of ecology, spirituality, and community building, claiming the festivals had played a key role in the production and assimilation of these new values, with the festivals acting as a sort of repository of a countercultural ethos. So this was all very real. It's, I felt I had discovered something. It's, I went out to kind of find this side of rave culture that was, Scott Hudson had said was, spiritual healing for our modern culture. And I found this kind of new religious movement blossoming. And as I started, interviewing some of the participants, they were definitely affirming that the shamanic potential of dance and music had opened a clear connection to the sacred, and definitely was laying the gridwork for what Robin Sylvan claimed was an emerging universal spirituality. So, inspired by this discovery of this kind of powerful avant-garde like techno shamanism, I continued ethnographic research for several years. I attended over 100 events. I think I interviewed like 65 some odd participants and scholars and authors, which ended up, being in the film Electronic Awakening. But during that time, I believe that what I was recording was the emergence of what's now being heralded as the Transformational Festival culture in the United States. So,
right.
after my successful Kickstarter campaign in 2010, I was able to acquire finishing funds for the film and finally get it made, and had a global release on December 21st, 2012, fittingly.
Wow. It's quite a journey you went on there. And I think that's an interesting point that you touch on, especially for people who maybe aren't as familiar with, the festival scene or rave scene. And maybe you could touch on it for a moment, having, being an expert that has explored so extensively. For people who don't know, I mean, what would you say is the difference between a rave and a transformational festival?
Well, I mean, the transformational festivals are, they're the intentional rave. They're the rave with purpose. Right. I know that, both these events have their kind of Dionysian mania, that, they are parties, they are, it is a giant celebration. But the transformational festivals themselves incorporate, they incorporate ritual, they incorporate ceremony, they incorporate a presubscribed list of, core values, that they're trying to embody through the event. So it's really, it's really different from that note that it's, it's partying with purpose. And It's, the transformational festivals themselves are kind of, they're still a branch of the electronic music scene, but they're kind of where this direction of where the spirituality of electronic dance music kind of took off and, transformed into this more, potent spiritual subculture.
Yeah, that would be my assessment. Personally, I wanted to hear what you would say, but it seems like the rave scene is sort of like there's some great concepts like plur, peace, love, unity, and respect, and but it's almost like this sort of like the superficial version of the a transformational festival where it's much more you have so much more of this energy of music being just a part of it, partying maybe being a part of it, but there's so much more going on, so many workshops and so much energy and attention put on ceremony and so forth, as you mentioned. So, so I definitely would agree with that.
And, and the thing is that the rave came first. It was, I interviewed a lot of these people that were involved in the production of, transformational festival events, and, they were all ravers.
Right.
They'd all
seems to be the intro point for a lot of people. Almost that attracts a younger crowd almost, and then as maybe you get older and as time has went along, just in culture in general, it seems like it's kind of like the next step of the rave.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the evolution of. I mean, not for everyone. But for the people in the scene that do take that direction. I mean, the rave kind of opens the doorway for that kind of new spirituality to, for somebody to take that on, and people that follow that trajectory, that's kind of the path that this is opened up to, is this transformational culture. So, it's really interesting looking at the emergence of the kind of more commercial EDM scene now that's exploding all over the place. It's like, how many of those participants, even though now they're kind of spiritually oblivious, it's like how many of those participants are going to have the same kind of awakening experiences and kind of follow the same like trajectory of conscious evolution that's happened for the rest of the scene in the early 90s, turning into these transformational festivals. Yeah,
that's the thing about a lot of the festivals, the transformational festivals that I go to. It's these amazing electronic producers, DJs that, compared to the mainstream EDM scene, they're like absolute nobodies. You know what I mean? When you take, if you're comparing, if you take as far as popularity, it's like some of the people you may find at a Ultra or EDC or something like that. They're these huge, like worldwide figures, and EDM. And then, the most popular artists in the transformational festival scene, at least on the West Coast, which, California primarily, where I live and am attending most of my events. They're big in that scene, but small comparatively. And I feel like the music, though, that they're performing is it's really kind of next level. And there is this kind of injection of spiritual energy into it that you're not necessarily hearing with some of the really mainstream artists, where it's much more like a kind of a club party feel.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the transformational festival community is still a pretty isolated still a pretty isolated event and isolated culture. I mean, even though it's grown, since I've kind of discovered this side of the scene, I mean, it's quadrupled in size, but it's still really closed off.
Yeah. Yeah. Comparatively to some of these bigger events for sure. And, now you actually define, the film would be defined as an ethnographic. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, definitely. So ethnography is the interpretation of the culture, and then to represent that culture, in the form of like film, photography, or writing. But it utilizes qualitative methods of research, which is extensive interviewing, participant observation, which is like actually going out and becoming one of the culture, and having the experiences yourself, and then going back and analyzing that and writing that, and of course basing a lot of your investigation on what you're learning through observation. And in terms of this study, it's for me, I was asking why are they conducting rituals at these events? Why are they using crystal grids on dance floors? Why so much attention is given to this this energy, and why are they treating these events and the way they set up these events is kind of like a spiritual technology. So going to school for anthropology, ethnography was a big part of my research process, and that was my intention of not only making this film, but the book I'm working on now was to do a full-on ethnography of the spirituality of the culture, and write about it from that point of view. So I mean, the first day out when I was at Shambhala, I was taking notes on all the ecstatic and psychedelic experiences that people were having, as well as how those fit into the context of the event. Their belief systems of the group. Their different narratives of apocalypse and singularity and context of ETs. I mean, all of it. I mean, it took notes from the perspective of a participant as well as a skeptical observer.
Interesting. And in your opinion, I mean, what do you feel is happening, on getting back to the music part of it? What do you feel is happening on the dance floor at these events? I know in the film you talk a little bit about, of course, comparison to shamanic ritual. And there's even talk of, the repetitive rhythms of the music actually create theta waves in the brain, and all sort of a hypnotized state. Is that, do you think that's the sum total of it? Do you feel like there is a spiritual, opening that's happening in mass, and it's sort of something that, to give you a quick example, I mean, my first year going to Burning Man was 2005, and I always remember my very first night there because it was the only time in my life I didn't take any kind of substance. And I felt like I had taken LSD or mushrooms or something like that. And the next day I was like, oh my gosh, what happened to me? Like, I literally had a trip without taking anything. And the only thing I can, credit it to now is I was so blown away by what I was seeing and the scale of it and the energy that I was feeling from, at the time, maybe, 45, 50,000, attendees. And so that's all I can really credit it to, is like I stepped into this container with this heightened energetic state, and it caused me to have an experience that felt like, I was something major had opened up in me. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Oh, completely. I mean, you don't need the psychedelic if the environment is psychedelic enough.
Right.
And especially if enough people around you are already on psychedelics, you kind of piggyback on their experiences. But there definitely is a connection, to being in close proximity to those kind of altered states that, brings you into the same state. But to go back to, an explanation of what's happening on the dance floor, as Electronic Awakening explains, these experiences at these events arise from, it's a convergence of intense dancing as a collective group, the entrainment of brainwaves to beat-focused music, taking people into trance and moments of group ecstasy, that hive mind experience everybody talks about. And also, the drug MDMA, which is sensitizing the body to this music. It releases serotonin. The music and dance are kind of like a crowbar prying the door open. But once there's an opening, MDMA and other psychedelics tend to force it wide open. So it's not generally an experience you can recreate in your living room. I mean, the event, and especially like Burning Man, it's one giant psychedelic amplifier.
Right.
So I think what people outside of this culture don't really understand about electronic music, and this is what we were talking about earlier, is that you could spend years listening to this music in your living room and not quite understand the resilience of hearing it amplified on huge speakers blasted over a field or coliseum with thousands of others. And you certainly wouldn't get it right until you heard it in conjunction with the powerful serotonin inhibitors, sensitizing your pores on your skin to actually feel the music in the, a tactile acoustic sense. I mean, it really kind of opens your pores and lets the music in. I say having that, that first experience of listening to electronic music on MDMA is kind of like a magic eye painting. It's like once you learn to see the three-dimensional image on the two-dimensional canvas, you can see it all the time. But you have to kind of have that first experience learning how to do that and learning how to see it that different way to be able to see it. And it's, kind of the same way because EDM is primarily percussive. The body responds to it differently. Body responds to polyrhythms and a complex layering of various beat patterns. And, while MDMA acts as an empathogen, it sensitizes the body to the music in ways impossible to experience without chemical aid. So you really experience music in a different way than you're used to. You're not really hearing music primarily from an auditory sense, but actually feeling it physically, move through your body and move your body. So the body and rhythm synchronize in step as well as an embodiment of the sound, and the music possesses you. And also new findings in neuroscience are showing us that repetitive rhythms or percussive sounds actually activate the premotor cortex of the brain. And this is the planning region of the brain, the region that's stimulated when we're about to move, telling the motor cortex what to move. So it's almost like you can't listen to dance music for an extended period of time and not, want to start to dance, tap your feet, or like bob your head. It's like, you don't necessarily have to enjoy the music to feel this sort of reaction. It's like it's doing that to you biologically. So the repetitive rhythms will naturally activate this premotor cortex, causing not only desire to move, but a sensation of moving. So even when you're, completely still listening to this music, you'll feel the sensation of moving with the music. It's like, the four on the floor beat feels like a train on the tracks, going along the tracks. And a lot of attendees of dance music events will often describe sensations of flying or floating while listening to the music, being drawn in towards the sound as they're dancing. And, the same is said in shamanism. The shamans talk about flight, the experience of flight to the astral plane when they're in that ecstatic dance. So what happens on the dance floor in this magic moment is that ecstatic state of trance. It's, the core experience of shamanic work. And when people are locked into this rhythm and synchronicity with sound, they feel a sense of rejuvenation, an openness within themselves. The world will seem full of possibility. And people have visions, spiritual revelations, contact with the mind of the planet or contact with extraterrestrials, depending on how hard of music you're listening to or what kind of drugs you're on. But, the whole catalog, the whole catalog of religious and mystical experience seems to be available in that moment, depending on how deep you go. And, also depending on the genre of music. People listening to dubstep in a nightclub aren't really going to reach the same place as, say, people on LSD on a psychedelic trance dance floor. So it really depends on, how hard and how long people are dancing or losing themselves in the trance.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things the movie talks about is that it actually, at one point references our bodies are actually, like tuners and receivers, and that it actually helps to open our chakras. And maybe you can explain a little bit about that. And for some of the listeners, they might not even be really familiar with what a chakra is. So maybe you can just explain a little bit of that concept.
Yeah. It's interesting because I didn't know what a chakra was when I went to my first event and heard all these people talking about chakras and, talking about the energy systems of the body. And, I was, especially taken aback when they were talking about these energy fields of the body being activated by electronic dance music. And, so that was something that for me, I was really curious about and really curious wanting to explore and kind of get an answer to. And, a good book that really kind of delves into that, is Eric Davis. Are you familiar with Eric Davis's work?
What's the name of the book? I might remember know the book.
Technosis?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
But Technosis, it kind of talks about how this, this ethereal field of energy, and this kind of like metaphysical dimension of energy is similar to, or is electricity. And so when we're talking about the energy of the body, in the energy systems of the body, we're really talking about, the electricity of the body, the body's nervous system. So, the music itself, it's the fact that the music itself is electronic, and the fact that it activates these different parts of our bodies in the different, frequencies and rhythms that are played. It's really interesting to kind of see the interplay of that sort of concept, being played out on the dance floor, and also in kind of the belief system of this culture, believing that these frequencies are actually spiritual frequencies, like awakening different parts of the body.
Right. Yeah, very fascinating. And, one of the things that also, I found really fascinating that was discussed in the film was, the people that are actually moving energy around when they dance, and opening up energy meridians, actually. That's something that's a whole nother concept that, you see people a lot of times that, and it's something until I honestly saw the movie, I never really thought about it. I just said, oh, well, that's just kind of like someone's style of dance. But really, it makes all the sense in the world when you look at the way, when people that are dancing in that particular fashion, it's like, oh, yeah, it's almost like, Qigong or one of these other practices that's all focused on channeling and using energy that's within the body that we typically don't focus on, and especially because it's not something that's visible, but it is actually there nonetheless. So I think that's a really interesting point that you guys touch on as well.
Yeah, I mean that the whole concept kind of started in the New Age movement with this this idea of animal magnetism, and the idea of these these energetic fields that move through our bodies. And it's really interesting to see how the rave culture kind of picked up these concepts. I mean, almost organically. It's almost like the experience of especially the experience of MDMA. I had a lot of interviewees talk about the experience of MDMA, kind of solidifying the experience of this energy and making them feel and see this energy as a real. As a real field, as a real magnetic field that was like physically there, that they could play with on the dance floor. And, they talk about when they're, at rave events and they're on MDMA or LSD, actually, playing with the connection of energy, between each other and like in their bodies, and playing with the connection of energy in their hands. And so for them, it's like, it really kind of reinvigorated this idea of what energy is. And kind of helped them establish a new relationship with that concept, one that included technology, and included the production of of music and music events. So it's it's interesting to see where this culture has kind of picked up where the like New Age movement has sort of left off with those concepts, and is kind of bringing it forward into a new era of technology.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it. And, one thing, of course, the film describing EDM as a source of spirituality, and that's what we're discussing here. But do you feel like this is a new spiritual movement that's going to continue to grow? And have you seen it? You've been at this for a while now. You said 2006. So, do you feel you hear a lot of talk these days about a spiritual revolution happening? So many people kind of waking up to the ultimate nature of reality, and the one, realizing that all is literally one, and, kind of having a shift in perspective. And so many people that go to these events, show up on a Thursday or Friday and leave on Monday. And, if it's their first event, something has kind of clicked in them or changed in them. Do you feel like, in the 9 years or so now that you've been watching this whole thing unfold, do you see it really, would you say there's a spiritual revolution happening and this is a part of it?
Oh, I mean, I certainly would. This was a lot of what my thesis was about in grad school that I just completed. But I looked at new religious movements, which are NRMs, which they're they refer to alternative or marginal religious movements, and most commonly designated as cults. But the transformational festival culture especially kind of rides this fine line between being a culture and being a new religious movement. And many rave collectives and festival communities alike are characterized by several distinguishing features, which are also prevalent in new religious movements. And like cultural dissatisfaction, religious iconography appropriated from other traditions, altered states of consciousness, radical personality transformation, the creation of community units, utopian ideals, charismatic leadership from certain members, and resistance to authorities and dominant culture. So there's definitely a comparison that could be made between the culture that's emerging now and new religious movements. And it's almost like this culture is in a sort of proto phase of becoming a sort of new kind of religion or new kind of spiritual revolution. The one thing that's really different is that in this culture, there's no singular leader. There's no one charismatic leader who's kind of guiding everyone through. I mean, though McKenna had a pretty good run in the 90s, but there's no singular doctrine. There's no rave Bible. There's no transformational festival manifesto. There's no Zen in the art of the dance party. So the culture remains in this sort of gray area between party and piety. Like, an unstable threshold keeps them from tipping over the edge and becoming yet another organized religion, as could be the outcome of transformational festivals in another 100 years or so. I mean, all major religions start out this way. They sort of start in this incubation, period. And in the transformational community, I think some people are pushing it in that direction, and others want it to remain free and clear of such rules and boundaries. But the thing is that when you start introducing things like ritual and ceremony alongside a prescribed list of core values, the free-for-all begins to self-organize around a common set of behaviors, similar fashions, ways of speaking, and things that you're required to believe in, kind of in order to fit in and belong.
Right.
Which to me seems like a transition away from the phase of social experimentation and open source consciousness exploration to having a well-codified endpoint, a specific goal that everyone's trying to achieve. And I think that that's happening. And, but if they're really...
That's what you see so much pushback on, from Burning Man, people that have been longtime burners. It's like, that's what you just hear a lot of people jumping up and down about, is like, it getting to be... taking away, you think back and hear stories of how it was in the 90s and, just this wide open anarchy kind of thing. And it's gotten more and more in a box in some regards. And so I think that's always the challenge, because you want to have some sort of cohesiveness, but also, like you said, you're kind of riding the fence, right? Of trying to keep a foot on both sides.
But that's the natural progression of these things. You can't live in the chaos for forever. I mean, the chaos is there for a reason. I mean, it's a phase. It's a phase of breaking down the pre-existing sort of boundaries and creating something new. But once you've established that new thing, you got to put a box around the new thing. I mean, that's kind of how these things happen and how these movements take off. And so, for the transformational festivals, if they're really trying to achieve a transformation of dominant culture and sort of a paradigm shift, I mean, this sort of doctrinated organization is a necessary step. And at some point, you have to close the valve on novelty and isolate the new narrative and the new values. So, I mean, this is kind of what's happening. And I mean, even from the transition of transformational festivals kind of gaining their title of being transformational festivals was kind of when they took this step in this direction. Becoming a new form of spirituality that's, even though they're still in the process of trying to define themselves, in terms of how they choose to organize the community and strengthen their cultural narrative. But I don't think that the end goal, really is a new religion for everyone, but instead a new relationship with the divine altogether. A new interpretation that doesn't involve so much of the, climbing the mountain through like rigorous education and practice as traditional religions. I think it's what they're doing is creating sort of a new spirituality, one that involves our technology, the science of the body, like I said, a new understanding of energy, and taking all that in and creating something that's, completely new that we haven't seen before. So, I mean, in the end, it is a new kind of religion that's emerging, but it's a religion not in the traditional sense that we've ever, that we've known it. So it's something completely new that's coming, but we have yet to be able to, see what that is and be able to define it.
Yeah, I think the big difference between what you're kind of saying here, and typical organized religion is spirituality in general is, in my definition, it's where it's, it's much closer to you. God isn't some external being outside of self that needs to be worshipped in order to be appeased, or else is going to torture you for eternity. It's so close. Everyone's been missing it all along. It's actually within you. You are that divine spark, an extension of it in the physical form. So I think as long as the focus remains on that, that sort of perspective, it should help guide away from any sort of organized hierarchy where there's, the head religious guy at the top of it, who's your communication to reach God, or the savior, or any of that sort of thing. That sort of narrative, I think. Let's certainly hope that none of that ever enters the festival scene, or I think I'll have to find a new hobby.
No, I don't think it's going to be part of the new thing.
Yeah, let's hope not. Let's hope not. Now, your film ends on the role, talking about 2012. In the role it played in the blossoming of this new spiritual festival culture, and I thought that was really interesting because, for me personally, my very first experience was with Burning Man in 2005, and then I went again in 2010, and then the first, festival, and having interviewed actually Marion Goodell, the CEO of Burning Man, not too long ago, she was very careful. Like, we're not a festival, we're an experiment and temporary community, and it's like, okay, whatever you want to call it, I get it. I see why you say that, and it's not a, there's not set artists and things like that. It's just wide open. And I get some of the reasons she wants to say that. But as far as my first quote unquote transformational festival was actually in 2012. And, having heard for so long about 2012 leading up to it as, the end of the world or the beginning of this new era of enlightenment, and me being the eternal optimist and having been on a spiritual path for, since I don't know, late 90s, and believing wholeheartedly that we are entering this new age of spiritual enlightenment where more and more people are waking up to, the truth of who and what we are and their divinity. That's, of course, the perspective that I took. So I thought it was interesting just for me personally to kind of have this long view coming from, the 90s on this personal spiritual path. And and I've mentioned this many times before, I would talk about spirituality and things like that for so many years, and people would be like, okay, that's really interesting, or, okay, what are you smoking? You're crazy. And very few, not finding other people who are on that sort of path, on that wavelength, aside from reading some books here and there where I was, had no exposure to these people that were writing the books. So I'm on an island talking about this stuff, and no one else in my world seems to even think in these terms. And leading up to really 2012, when I first went to my, first transformational festival, and have been to many, many, many since, it's like all of a sudden I just started meeting all these people who are coming online and talking about this stuff as passionately as I do, and, seeing the world and the ultimate nature of reality and so forth through, the same way. And so for me personally, it certainly seemed like a transition point, 2012, where definitely a new path was kind of started as far as these sorts of spiritual matters. So I'm curious what your thoughts, with the film ending, talking a little bit about the role 2012 played, and if you kind of agree with that perspective that it was indeed a turning point to this new spiritual path for humanity.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems, 2012 was the birth of the legitimacy of this, this new culture. And it also, it was the first year for a lot of people's first time at transformational festivals. I mean, the culture really exploded in that year. So it really marked something significant that happened, not just for the planet, but for this movement as well. It was a big year. The key term that I've looked at in all of this is millenarianism, which is tracing back to, tracing all the way back to the early rave scene. It was a big part of the narrative, this idea of ascensionism in 2012. But millenarianism is the belief by a religious, social, or political group or movement of a coming major transition. And, this is a common theme of religions. It's, groups claim that current society and its rulers are corrupt, unjust, and, believe that they will one day be overthrown by supernatural forces, usually following an apocalyptic cataclysm. A new world culture will rise up from the ashes of the old. We've heard all this before. A new purified world, the golden age will come. So, this was a really common archetype among EDM festivals, and also, the transformational community. And, looking back at the history of kind of the 2012, narrative of, apocalypse or, global change, in 1987, I don't know if you're familiar with the harmonic convergence.
Yes.
The harmonic convergence was a planetary alignment that was, celebrated all over the world by, Jose Aguarelos brought a lot of attention to it, but it was supposed to mark kind of this, the beginning of this transition to, into 2012. And it was also supposed to mark the, kind of the birth of a new culture on the planet. And so it's really interesting that that very same year, 1987, is considered the birth of rave culture.
Interesting.
So like the two kind of, even though they were unaware of each other, it's, the myths kind of, fit hand in hand. So, the early rave culture, they believed when these parties first started happening, they believed they were the new humans. They believed they were heralding a new movement that would raise the consciousness of the planet through music and dance. They believed they had unlocked the tesseract of fundamental religious thought, and, they're discovering this was going to save and change the world. Not everybody in the culture, believed this, but there was enough that a strong narrative was established there. And of course, the naiveties of that discovery, fueled fantasies of utopia. And, Douglas Rushkoff, the author, wrote a science fiction novel called Ecstasy Club, which was about, raves in the Bay Area in the early 90s. And he wrote in that book something he called the Eightfold Path of Ravers. And it kind of describes some of this narrative that they were creating at that time. But the ninefold path are to become more than human, to evolve consciously and purposefully within a single lifetime, to deprogram the social set designed to trap us in mundane thought structures, to reprogram that set as individuals and as a collective, to disconnect from personal habit, character, and ego, to reframe and disengage from mundane attachments through ritual and ceremony, to synchronize ourselves into a meta-organism, no one more important than the other, to increase the frequency of this organism, making it capable of rising above matter, and to rebirth ourselves as pure consciousness, breaking through time itself. So,
Wow.
This kind of demonstrates, some of the narrative that was going on there. And, this fed the idea that a supernatural force would, that the raves were kind of awakening into this, this kind of new consciousness, and that a supernatural force would one day destroy the old capitalistic and unsustainable global culture, and that the new consciousness that they were bringing in would, take its place. So this sort of narrative was really popular in the rave scene. If anything, it provided meaning and substance to the party, and to an experience that was already shamanic and esoteric and life changing. To put that up against the backdrop of a countercultural insurgency, a supernatural one at that, it really solidified an already cohesive community into a collective purpose. And that's really where dance music culture sort of propelled forward away from the chaotic party towards this intentional application. Right. Now that we see as the transformational cultures that exist now sort of really started, when this took a turn. So, back in that time, here comes Terence McKenna with this time wave zero theory and novelty accelerating to infinity in 2012, and the Mayan calendar ended and the shoe just fit. And, the culture found its millenarian myth of ascensionism, really legitimized, what Terence McKenna was saying, it really legitimized what they were already feeling. And McKenna was more than happy to, egg on this idea. He saw rave culture as the new planetary culture that we're going to bootstrap the Mayan myth of apocalypse and a golden age. And even in 1983, at a rave organized by a group called the Shaman, Terence McKenna stood up on stage and gave an announcement, and you can still find this on YouTube, where he says, basically that the rave culture is, sort of bringing us 100,000 years into the past, and reestablishing our connection to the divine feminine, and that rave culture is the real new world, and it's going to carry all of us forward into a world of completion and carrying that we have not known since the pyramids were raised. Saying that the rave culture was the final generation that was going to, return us all to the Paleolithic world of magic and psychedelic plants. And
this was 83?
93.
Oh, okay. I was about to say, wow, I didn't even know, the first rave. Yeah, you said 87 already. So yeah.
No, 93. So really this, this kind of whole culture that's around now, the transformational culture, McKenna called it all the way back in 1993 that this is the direction that it was going. And, not only that, but he stood up and gave talks at a lot of raves. To all these people that, this is what's going on. We're right on the cusp of 2012, and this is the transformation that's happening. And, to see that that's actually what's happened in its history, it's really interesting. But so for many, and what has become the transformational community, saw 2012 as its approaching turning point. Yet the narrative of apocalypse has been replaced by one of consciousness evolution. And, the story gave strength to the scene. It attracted a lot of it attracted a lot of attention to the community. It certainly increased the numbers. People really wanted to party in 2012. You said that your first transformational festival was in 2012. That was the same for a lot of people. There was a lot of people that I knew that I had been describing these parties to for so long, and in 2012 was like the year that they all went. So it really accelerated the growth of this culture, and, sort of gave them, the push to get over the edge into being a legitimate movement in that year. And also in that year, EDM became mainstream. Commercial electronic music festivals quadrupled in size. Psychedelics were all over popular media. Was 2012 real? Who cares? The myth worked, and that's what's important.
Right. Right.
So
very true.
And so it also kind of leaves the mystery open to question if there really were some connection between the evolution of human culture, the planet, and the cosmos. So, really 2012 at the end of it was really a quick cliffhanger for the next Bach tune.
Very, very interesting. Yeah, it definitely seems that way to me. Like I said, from my personal, we all have our personal perspective on how things unfold, and with our own story. And it was very much like 2012 was a major turning point in my connection to others that are on a similar spiritual path. And now it's all that surrounds me. Whereas for, like I said, for more than a decade, it was like there was no one to even talk to about these things. I would do it anyway, just because I was so passionate about it. But it's definitely an interesting perspective to kind of see how it's all unfolded. And of course, it's fascinating, which leads to the next question. What do you think is the future of this movement?
Well, it's really interesting to see where it's gone between when I started studying the culture back in 2006, leading up to that point in 2012, and, then seeing, because when I started studying this, nobody else really listened to electronic music. It was still this really kind of hidden and underground thing, and people that thought that knew that you listened to electronic music thought you were weird. So to see that now it's, blossomed into this, enormous mainstream culture, is, I couldn't have asked for a better ending. But the future of where it's going, today, electronic music is a game-changing genre for the entertainment industry. It's single-handedly revolutionized, a new generation of youth standardizing ecstatic entertainment, normalizing psychedelic drug use and catapulting, youth desires for extraordinary experiences. So while this new kind of electronic dance music scene, looks commercial and looks like a corporate sponsor form of the chaotic hedonism at the core of the scene, the spiritually oblivious, we have to remember, the history of the culture on a whole. And so this is what we were talking about before about, all the people that are involved in organizing transformational festivals now were all ravers at once.
Yeah, right.
So it's almost through that strange attractor of the Dionysian chaos, the seeds of spiritual and transformational fruition were inadvertently sown. So we have to ask if the same thing is happening now. And if, and if the same thing is happening to a portion of the, the larger, more commercial scene today, now it's millions and millions of people that are involved in that. So, and seeing the increasing fame of, events like the Electric Daisy Carnival, Coachella, and Ultra, are all over headlines and, Time Magazine, Newsweek, and USA Today. Alongside that, Forbes Magazine recently released an article, "Are Psychedelics the Wonder Drug We've Been Waiting For?" Where they actually, exhibit public approval for MDMA and MDMA research. And, of course, Burning Man, the mother of all festivals, is everywhere now, including a sandwich commercial for Quiznos. I don't know if you've seen that.
I know, I did. I saw something about a possible lawsuit over it or something, but I don't know if that really happened or not. But I did see the commercial.
But so, so this culture has exploded well beyond the underground and is now kind of a normalized thing for new generations. So it seems, from my perspective, with all eyes of, society and this pre-mutant novelty of the electronic dance music festival phenomena, it seems that pop culture itself is entering a unique paradigm. And in an age of extreme technological novelty, social media, smartphones, virtual reality, it seems culture all over the planet, is arriving at this sort of turbulent epoch of hyper interconnectivity and weirdness, basically. Yeah. But we're witnessing the convergence of all these cultures from all over the world, inspiring novelty and globalizing the avant-garde. So I believe that this widespread public interest in electronic dance music is sort of expressing this deep sign of the times. It's expressing a yearning for connection and for novelty, fueled by a disconnected culture with a viscosity of boredom. So, and we have a youth right now that's seeking out the furthest extremes, most for points on Instagram, and some and some for just an expanding desire for the bizarre. I mean, if you just look at Miley Cyrus, she's leading a new generation of teenagers back into Peter Gation's limelight. But society is always on the lookout for new forms of leisure, new forms of expression, and new forms of spirituality. And it seems like the electronic dance music culture that's emerging now is a promising enterprise offering the convergence of all three. As a musical form, it's on par with the musical shift experience with rock and roll in the 50s and 60s. As a form of entertainment, the festivals now represent a multi-billion-dollar industry. And as a form of spirituality, scholars all over the world have conceptualized raving as a religious experience at its core. And the Transformational Festivals have demonstrated, the potent evolution of that initial ecstatic seed. So the culture of the world is moving into this new frontier, and EDM festivals seem poised to play a powerful role in sort of ushering in this new era.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely looks like it's here to stay. And is only going to grow. So let me ask you this. Now, you've, having researched and asked so many questions and interviewed so many people at these events, and we've talked so much about the kind of spiritual experience that people can have at festivals. Any particular stories that stick out to you that anyone shared with you during your research?
Oh, yeah. One of the best interviews I had was, I guess I can say his name. He signed the release paper, but Adam Apollo. Adam Apollo, and he gave me an interview where he told the story of sort of his evolution in the rave scene of finding the parties for the first time, taking MDMA for the first time. And kind of what happened to how the parties began to transform himself, and also how the parties began to sort of open him up into this new understanding of energy and how energy works with the body and how energy works on the dance floor. And he talks about it a little bit in the film, and you're going to have to read my book later on to get the full story that he gives. But it just makes the the hairs on the back of your neck stand up of what he kind of discovers through the manipulation of this energy field on the dance floor through electronic music and, what that really is, and kind of where the future of that's going with, with new technology.
Wow, very interesting. And that's a story that we have to wait for the book to hear, is what you're saying.
It's in the book. I don't give too much.
And when is Electronic Revival coming out? Do you know?
I'm finishing I've got the first draft complete. I'm going through and editing the second draft now. I'm hoping to be able to make it out for the festival season in 2016.
Cool. Well, I will definitely be looking for that, and I'm sure people listening to this will be looking for it as well. So that's very exciting. That's your first book, right?
It's my first nonfiction. I've done a few science fiction novels, but this is the first actual, ethnographic, anthropological.
Okay,
study.
Cool.
So it's a little bit different.
Very, very cool. Well, this has been very, very fascinating to kind of pick your brain. And of course, it's something that's so close to my heart, having a lot of these firsthand experiences. So to hear from someone like yourself who's come at it from such a research-based approach, it's really interesting to and even validating for a lot of my own perspective and experience. One of the things, of course, I always like to get from my guest, and I certainly understand wanting to save your juicy story with Adam Apollo for the book, for people to read in the book. How about an AC story, a story of synchronicity or serendipity, or a positive paranormal, story of some kind?
Oh, geez, here we go.
Got anything to share? So, I'm going to ask.
Yeah, I know. So it relates to this whole study and why I took such an interest in the whole 2012 myth with the culture. So long before I went to school for anthropology, and long before I started studying rave events, I was writing science fiction. I was writing my first science fiction novel, and it was actually about an apocalypse in 2012. And I was in Ireland at the time. I was writing this book in an empty library, just spending months and months on it. And I guess all of that, kind of seclusion and isolation and just sitting in front of my computer day after day got to me. But, I started sort of imagining what that would really be like, and what 2013 was really going to have in store. And I created this character that I called the Stranger. And as I created this character, I began playfully having a dialogue with this character, like as I was writing the book. And what I kind of got from this dialogue in the book was this idea that in 2012, this global culture was going to emerge, like a tribe that was going to leave all the cities and, go out into the woods and go back to nature and begin living in this new culture, in this higher state of cultural complexity. And, so I was writing all that in this science fiction novel. And then, I never finished the book. I only got halfway through with it and, just completely shelved it. And didn't think about it again until I stepped out on the dance floor for the first time at Shambhala. And when I was out there on the dance floor and I was hearing psychedelic trance for the first time, all of a sudden I look around me and just in this weird, I guess they would call it a download in the culture. But I
had that
suddenly looked around and I was like, oh my God, these are the people that I was envisioning. Like years ago when I was writing that novel, I was like, This is exactly what that is. This is what's happening. And, so of course it was just kind of a playful idea. I was obviously being under the influence at a rave here in psychedelic trance for the first time. You're going to, think a lot of strange things, but, but it allowed me to kind of open up to, when I began hearing all of these, when I began interviewing people and hearing all these stories about, about their own beliefs of, the kind of the awakening that was happening in 2012 and their own visionary experiences, I was able to, converse with them and kind of latch onto their stories because I had my own sort of, visionary experience of, of that moment happening. it also really kind of gave me an interesting perspective on, what mythology is and where mythologies really come from. And, why you get groups of people that all start seeing the same things around the same time. And what that all really means for, for spirituality, for, the source of our mythologies, the source of our spiritual beliefs. And if there really is a, one kind of invisible dimension where all that data is stored. So that was definitely part of my interests, and the reason why I wanted to focus so much on what 2012 was really about and how that played a part in the evolution of this culture.
Very cool. So you essentially were playfully making up a concept for your book many years prior, and then next thing you know, you turn around and look around and you realize you might have been prophetic, huh?
I think you can look at it from a lot of different perspectives, but that was the more entertaining perspective for sure.
Yeah. Well, definitely, I think there's a lot to be said for that sort of experience. And I think sometimes people even discount it or feel, slow to say, I had a vision of something, or, for me, I've had many things like that in my life, from, the day my grandfather died, having, when I was 11 years old, having a whole vision of it and then it happening hours later, or, having something that's happened a lot with me in recent years is when I'll meet someone that is going to be significant in my future in some way, I'll get like a very strong indicator of it. And I've started kind of cluing in on it after a while, and it's like clockwork. It always ends up being the case, or I guess the verdict's still out with some people, but it's one of those things where I'll get strong feelings or even sensations like chills from head to toe. And so I think there's a lot. You just gave the example of Terrence McKenna predicting it, or even in the movie, where I think it's really cool how it has Jim Morrison predicting the whole EDM movement way back in the 70s, right? So I think there's, it's certainly information that can be tapped into, and especially when you're already on that wavelength, and it's a part. Look at what a big part of your future it ended up being. So for you, many years prior to kind of be tapping into that, it makes a lot of sense, and certainly makes a fun story, right?
Yeah, and for this culture especially, and for anybody who was really into that kind of more mystical aspect of 2012. I mean, you really have to kind of take those experiences as genuine. I mean, that's kind of what it was about kind of playing along with those feelings and those intuitions and seeing where they took you. And, that's kind of what the culture did on a whole when they, sort of bootstrapped this myth of, the whole 2012 Ascensionism. It's like, is it real? Is it not? It doesn't really matter, because the myth worked, for the culture. It's like that narrative.
And when enough people are giving energy to it, it just, it kind of takes on, it's like creating your own sort of myth come true, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So AC, where's the best place for people who want to go check out the movie for them to see it?
Let's see. It would really depend on what country you're in. Okay. Unfortunately.
How about the U.S.?
In the U.S., the best place is Hulu.
Okay.
And outside of the U.S., it's really different for every country. I would just say if you just do a Google search for the film, it's going to bring up a lot of links and a lot of connections to it. But definitely, if you're in the United States, Hulu is the place to watch it.
And it's called Electronic Awakening, as a reminder for you guys out there who want to check it out.
And if you can't find it for free, you can always just go to the website, electronicawakening.com, and you can watch it from our site for, I think, $2.99 is what it's set at. And that all goes back to helping me pay off the film, which I'm still doing, unfortunately, now.
Yeah. Yeah, these things don't happen for free. No, unfortunately. But, well, AC, I absolutely thoroughly enjoyed talking to you about this. It's such a fascinating topic, and you've done such thorough research, and you have so much a wonderful perspective on it also. Thank you so much for, taking the time to join me and sharing, all your thoughts and letting me kind of pick your brain on this stuff. Before I let you go, though, I can't let you off the hook without asking my put my interviewee on the spot question, and that is, what is the meaning of life according to AC Johnner? In 60 seconds or less, preferably.
I have to take a bathroom break again.
Oh, man, that's cheating.
Let's see. The meaning of life is to always be curious and to always follow those curiosities.
Well said. Fair enough. I appreciate your time, AC. This has been great once again. I definitely would like to circle back around with you down the road when your book is out and we have some more interesting things to talk about. Until then, just keep up all the great work that you're doing.
Sounds good. Well, thanks a lot, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you. Well, everyone, that concludes the Positive Head podcast interview for this week. If you were as enthralled by this topic as I was, and you'd actually like to host a screening of this awesome film in your city, or perhaps at the festival you produce, you can easily set that up by reaching out to the music director and executive producer of the film, Keyframe Entertainment, via their website, which is keyframe-entertainment.com. And also, remember, if you haven't rated us on iTunes yet, go do it now. Please and thank you. Otherwise, until next time, journey well, everyone. And remember, as long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead.